Having given the function argument, um, it's still unclear what exactly happiness is. As Aristotle says in Book 1, Chapter 7, happiness is virtuous rational activity. That's a sketch or an outline of the human good. It's still not entirely clear what exact kind of life we are called to lead, right? It's not entirely clear what exactly happiness is. If all you knew was that happiness is virtuous rational activity, what are you going to do differently tomorrow? Or what are you going to do to help achieve that? It's really unclear still. Aristotle needs to clarify what exactly virtue means, what they are, and what the various rational activities are. That's what the rest of the ethics, more or less, attempts to do. And in Book 1, Chapter 13, Aristotle sets out a kind of, I don't know, call it a roadmap for the rest of the ethics. And he does so by dividing the soul. What this is going to do is it's going to isolate the various kinds of rational activities that human beings engage in. And then Aristotle is going to give an account of the virtues that go along with each particular kind of rational activity. And so as we proceed through the ethics, getting greater clarity about what these rational activities are and what their corresponding virtues are, we are getting a clearer picture of what exactly happiness is. All right, so in Book 1, Chapter 13, he divides the soul and it sets out this kind of map. How does this work? Well, I don't know exactly how to draw a soul. Souls are immaterial, according to Aristotle. They're, well, whatever, it doesn't matter. We're not going into any of that stuff. He's got a whole book on the soul, but we're not looking at it. So I'm just going to use a big yellow sphere, right? That's as good a depiction of a soul as I can imagine. Now, in Book 1, Chapter 13, the first thing he does is and a little bit of background. Aristotle's idea of a soul, it's not like just some ghost or something that inhabits your body or whatever. Aristotle sees his primary way of looking at a soul is that it's the principle of life. It's what makes something alive. And so according to Aristotle, and we've talked about this already in the function argument, anything that's alive has a soul. Grass has a soul. Your dog has a soul, right? It's what makes something alive. It's a principle of life. And so all of the life activities that we engage in, we human beings engage in, are activities of our soul. So everything from thinking about God, that's something we do according to Aristotle. That's an activity of the soul. And we might want to say, yeah, that's okay. Sure. Somebody would say something like that. That seems obvious or something. Yeah. And thinking about God or praying to God or something like that. That's activity of soul. But Aristotle would also say digesting food is an activity of your soul as well, right? Because that's a life activity. It's something you do in virtue of being alive. It's a kind of expression of your life. And so all of these activities come from the soul. What Aristotle sets about doing now in Book 1, Chapter 13, he calls it dividing the soul, but you can think of it in terms of kind of categorizing the various life activities that human beings engage in. And so the first thing he does is he divides the soul in half into an irrational part and a rational part. Some of the life activities that we engage in involve reason, right? We, for example, do math. That involves reason. That activity comes from the rational part of our soul. But some activities we engage in don't really seem as much to involve reason. Let's look at those. Let's look at the irrational part, because that's what Aristotle focuses on here in Book 1, Chapter 13. He divides the irrational part in two. He divides it into what he calls a vegetative part of the soul. Sometimes he'll also call it a nutritive part, vegetative, nutritive, growing. Sometimes he calls it vegetative, nutritive, something like that. And an appetitive part of the soul. Sometimes he calls this the desiderative part of the soul. All right, so what okay, what are these? What's going on? These are weird words. What's he talking about? Start with vegetative. Aristotle would say these are activities that we hold in common with plants. Our cells, Aristotle didn't know about cells, but it doesn't matter, right? Our cells regenerate, they grow, they divide, yeah? And, they die off, and then other cells divide, and you get new cells, whatever, right? None of that is controlled by your mind. Your body kind of automatically does it. Likewise, with your heart beating, your heart kind of, the blood kind of coursing through your veins and arteries, taking nutrients to where they need to go, nourishing, right, your organs and tissues and so on, right? That's not anything you control with your mind, with your reason. It's an irrational activity or irrational. It doesn't involve reason, and it's something that plants do. Plants don't have hearts or whatever, but they have a kind of analog to veins or something, like, right? They carry nutrients through the organism up to, whatever. I don't know how they work exactly, right? But from the leaves into the trunk or something, I don't know how it works. Nonetheless, nutrients travel through the organism, through the tree, and that's a kind of analog, I think Aristotle would say, and it makes enough sense, right, to blood going through our bodies. Digesting animal or plants, again, don't have mouths and stomachs or whatever, but they take in nutrients. They take in things from outside them and reconfigure them and shed off waste products. We do the same thing. You eat the leg of turkey or whatever, and it goes in your body, right? What's really irrational, what I mean by digesting, is not so much like the eating of the turkey leg, right? You have control over that. You can choose to do that or not. When I talk about digesting here under the vegetative part of the soul, it's really like once the turkey is in you, yeah, and what your body starts doing to it, I don't know, shooting acid at it and then squeezing it and whatever else it does. I don't know what it does. That is not controlled by reason. That is something that animal bodies do. It's something that plant bodies do, right? All of these activities that we don't have any kind of rational control over, that we hold in some sense in common with plants, but also animals, those are vegetative, right? And he calls it vegetative because, it's what plants do as well, right? That's a kind of activity of the soul. Now, what you'll notice is it's over in the irrational part, irrational, it's irrational. And Aristotle's idea is that happiness is rational activity in accordance with virtue. These vegetative activities have absolutely nothing to do with reason. There's no rational control over them at all. And so those vegetative activities are in no sense rational activities. And Aristotle thinks that they have no part of happiness. Yeah, you need to kind of be healthy and have a body in good working order, and you need those things to be going in order to be happy, in order to then go do the things that make you happy. But those things, digesting, your stomach digesting food, that's not what happiness consists in, according to Aristotle. And so we've isolated these kinds of activities, this part of the soul. We're getting greater clarity on what our happiness consists in. What we know at this point, it doesn't consist in any of that vegetative stuff because it's irrational, non-rational, irrational. Okay, so that part of the soul has nothing to do with happiness. Turn now to the appetitive part. He also calls it the desiderative part. What does he have in mind exactly? Well, another kind of activity we engage in. So yeah, fine. We, our stomachs digest food or something when we put food in there. That's one kind of activity of soul, one life activity we have. Another kind, we have desires. We experience pleasure and pain. We have emotions or feelings or passions. Emotions, feelings, passions. In Greek, there's just one word for that. And so I think our translation goes with passion. So you find that word throughout our translation of Aristotle, passion, passion, passion. The idea there is not, in English, passion it might have certain connotations that aren't really warranted here. Aristotle is just talking about like feelings or emotions, right? That might be a better translation, but we find passion, whatever, it doesn't matter. That's something that we do. That's a kind of activity that we engage in. Yeah. Plants don't have desires or appetites or emotions, according to Aristotle. But animals do. Dogs, clams, even fish and everything, birds and everything else, all have desires of certain sorts. They all have passions or emotions of a kind. And so that's why this appetitive part of the soul is lumped into the irrational part of our soul, because it's something we share in common with irrational animals. It's something we share in common with all of the animals. All of the animals have something like this in some form or another, right? Any animal, according to Aristotle, any animal that has the sense of touch, and he thinks every animal has the sense of touch, is accordingly also going to have the ability to feel pleasure or pain, however minimally, and so have desires or appetites in some, however minimal sense, related to that pleasure and pain. That's kind of Aristotle's view. Well, okay, so do we say the same thing about these kinds of activities, right? And so by emotions, feelings, passions, what he has in mind are things like feeling fear, feeling angry, right? He would want to say, yeah, animals, certain animals at least, can get angry. Animals can be fearful or can be afraid, I should say. Animal and whatever, right? Though that's what he means by emotions, feelings, passions, things like that. Okay, so those are all lumped as irrational activities. So do we say the same thing about them as we said about the vegetative part of the soul, that those appetitive activities have no part of happiness? Do we say that? No, according to Aristotle, because there's a crucial difference between these appetitive activities, these activities that come out of the appetitive part of our soul, our desires, our emotions, and so on, right? Emotions, feeling an emotion would be an appetitive activity, right? There's a crucial difference between activities like that and then these vegetative activities. And the crucial difference is that the appetitive part of the soul and all the activities that come out of it can be persuaded by, can listen to the rational part of the soul, right? And so his idea here is, yeah, okay, fine. And this is actually different from animals. So animals have these appetites and desires too, but since animals don't have a rational part of their soul, they can't, the rational part of the soul can't persuade their appetites. They just don't have a rational part to do the persuading. Human beings, by contrast, we do have a rational part of our soul, and it can persuade or convince our appetites. What does that mean? Think of it like this. Let's take a simple appetite, hunger. You're really hungry. And I present you with, I don't know, a steak or something. A steak. Your desires might say, yeah, go eat the steak. Go do it. But your rational part of your soul can say, let's say you're a vegetarian and you think vegetarianism is, that eating meat is morally wrong. Your rational part of the soul can say, don't do it. Don't give in to that appetite. That's a bad appetite. You want to eat the flesh of a living being? That's gross. Don't do that. That's wrong. Right? How much did that cow have to suffer for this? Right? Don't do that. And so your rational part of the soul can control your appetites and perhaps even convince it, go away, right? We don't want that. Another example, right? And so that's something human beings can do that Aristotle would say animals can't, right? You have a hungry dog, you show it a steak, it's just going to go eat it. It's not going to, well, wait a minute. What kind of pain did that cow go through? And I don't, right? It's not going to do anything like that, right? It's not going to make its appetites listen to reason. It doesn't have reason, according to Aristotle. Another example. Say you're in the car and you're driving down whatever, Lakeshore Drive or something, and someone just zoom right into your lane, and it's literally, you know, it's an old guy or something, right? And they're got the Coke bottle glasses and whatever, can barely see. Whatever, I don't know why it needs to be an old guy like that, but you might start, you know, just yelling, just saying the worst, nastiest stuff, just wishing, you know, that the worst possible things could happen to this person who dared to swerve an inch into your lane. But okay, so that's a kind of an emotion, a feeling that you're having, right? Comes from that appetitive part of the soul. But what Aristotle would say is that your rational part can kind of kick in, can kind of say, well, look, hey, hold on, anger. You know, it was just an inch. It's not that big of a deal. He's just a old guy. You know, it's just driving cars. It doesn't matter. Stop being so angry. You know, there are studies that show that we tend to depersonalize and so kind of dehumanize people who are in cars because we don't really see their faces. We just see this car. And so it's a lot easier to just get all worked up and just hate that car and whoever's in it. But if you see someone's face, you kind of calm down. You don't think such nasty things, whatever. I don't know, right? And so your rational part of the soul can say, hey, look, I know all that. And so I shouldn't be so angry. This is ridiculous. And the rational part of your soul can actually calm down your anger. It can persuade your anger, right? That's what Aristotle has in mind here. And this is going to be crucially important because what it means for Aristotle is that the appetitive part, though it is irrational, it's on that side of the soul, it's kind of rational. It's quasi-rational because it can be made to listen to reason. And so for our purposes and for Aristotle's purposes in the ethics, the appetites, desires, pleasures, and pains, emotions, feelings, passions, they count as rational activities because they can be made to listen to reason. Yeah, they're part of the irrational soul, but because they can be made to listen to reason, they count as rational activities. And so they are part of our happiness. Now, notice that this is a difference between appetites, the appetitive part of the soul, and the vegetative part of the soul. I can control my anger, not in every situation. Sometimes our emotions get the best of us. Aristotle knows that. But in principle, at least, I can control my emotions using my reason. I can't do that for the vegetative part of my soul, for those activities, right? If I just ate a corn dog or something, I can't, and now it's, you know, it's inside, it's in my stomach or whatever. I can't just tell myself, okay, stop secreting acid. Stop doing it, right? Don't move it down into the small intestine. I can't control that stuff at all, right? My body just automatically does it. All the vegetative activities are like that. I can't directly exert control over them. My reason can't directly control them. It can indirectly. Yeah. You know, I could, whatever. I can make my heart beat faster, not directly, not by just thinking about it, but I could run back and forth. And so, whatever, something like that. The relevant point is I can't directly control those vegetative activities, whereas I can directly control appetitive activities, even though it might be very difficult, even though some people never seem to directly control their appetites. Human beings can do that, though. And so they count as rational activities for our purposes. Okay, so that's one kind of rational activity. And there's a whole bunch, right? Fear and anger and so on. All of these are going to count as rational activities. Feeling fear is a kind of rational activity, according to Aristotle. Feeling anger is a kind of rational activity, according to Aristotle. It comes from this appetitive part of the soul, which can be persuaded by the rational part. Well, now the question is, well, what are the virtues of that part of the soul? Aristotle calls them moral virtues. Moral virtues govern the appetitive part of the soul. And they're also called character virtues. That's another translation of moral virtue. Sometimes, so you might find me lapsing into calling them character virtues. Character virtues, moral virtues, same things, just different ways of translating the Greek word there. So character virtues, moral virtues, they govern this appetitive part of the soul. Aristotle discusses them in books 2 through 5 of the Nicomachean Ethics. So a good chunk of the Nicomachean Ethics is devoted just to discussing these things. And these are going to include virtues such as courage, temperance or moderation, um, generosity, magnanimity is another one, justice. These are all moral virtues, and they get discussed in books 2 through 5. These are virtues that govern our appetites. And so Aristotle's, so he's kind of laying out this roadmap in book 1, chapter 13. Here is one kind of rational activity, namely these appetites. And there's a lot of different kinds of appetites, and he's going to need to talk about them. And here is the kind of virtue that goes with them. I call them moral virtues. I'm going to talk about them in more detail in the next 4 books of the Nicomachean Ethics, right? And so that's what we're going to be turning to next, book 2. We're only reading selections. We're reading most of book 2. We're only reading selections from book 2. Books 3 through 5 really just go into more detail about the specific virtues. We're not going to look at that. But that's the moral virtues. Very quick, after we're done with book 2, we're going to look at the other part of the soul, right? So books 2 through 5 deals only with those rational activities that come from the appetitive part of the soul. Well, that's leaving all of the strictly speaking rational activities, right? All the stuff that comes from the rational part of the soul, that gets discussed in book 6. The virtues that go along with those activities are called intellectual virtues. He introduces that phrase here, right? So the intellectual virtues go with the rational part of the soul. And his treatment of them comes in book 6. There's only 2 of them. We'll get to that when we get to it. He divides the soul again. He divides the rational part of the soul in book 6. But that's what's coming up later. So right now, or for next week, we're going to be shifting attention now to the moral virtues. We're going to look, what are these moral virtues? What exactly are those appetitive activities that they go with? How do they work? That's what we're going to be looking at.